Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, straightening my glasses. That's it. End of video. No, seriously. Quasi-seriously. Here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade, and we're already up to Symphony number 7, Le Midi, which is the afternoon. I have no idea what that means in terms of the music. All I know is that Haydn had to write 3 symphonies to introduce himself to his new patron, Prince Esterhazy. And Prince Esterhazy wanted him to write 3 symphonies based on times of the day because he liked Vivaldi's 4 seasons, which are based on the seasons of the year. What one thing has to do with the other, again, only Prince Esterhazy knows for sure. So this is noon, le midi, the afternoon, the day. This is the Middle Symphony, number 7. And I really think, it's a little bit difficult to figure out what this symphony has to do with the day or the afternoon. Probably nothing. It seems to me probably nothing for a couple of reasons. But, you'll remember that Symphony number 6 began with an obvious portrayal of sunset and lots of pastoral music led by the solo flute. And so we knew that morning was morning. Well, noon, I don't know what this is. This begins with a slow march in dotted rhythm. Dotted rhythm means dum, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. That's a dotted rhythm. Maybe that symbolizes lunch. Who knows? It's such a great symphony. All 3 of them are. And of course, because Haydn was trying to introduce himself to his new patron and show off the fabulous new shiny orchestra that he had just put together for Haydn to write for, it has amazing solos for everybody in the orchestra. Everybody. Even the double bass player gets a solo. It really is incredible. And this was a larger orchestra than Haydn wrote for in his first batch of symphonies, which, as I mentioned a million times, are not in chronological order. So the first 15 or 20 or so actually came before this one, which is number 7. And so we're going to take a jump backwards after we get done with number 8, which was the last in this series. But even so, they're incredibly fabulous works. And with each one, Haydn, who almost never repeated himself, he just didn't, found new and thrilling ways to create and enlarge the concept of what a symphony could be. And this one is no exception. Now, this symphony features as scoring 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 horns, a bassoon, and the normal strings, with, in most cases, an extra harpsichord playing a sort of harmonic filler continuo part, which Haydn never wrote, never cared about, and you can leave it out. But this performance, which is the Naxos recording, it's the Northern Chamber Orchestra, I think it's something like that. It's one of those, something in the north. It has, I think, northernness attached to it somewhere. Let's see. Yes, the Northern Chamber Orchestra under Nicholas Ward. It's an excellent performance. But, the thing about the symphony is that because it's about the afternoon, which is about nothing, I happen to think Haydn was playing a little joke. And I'll tell you what the little joke is. This may be a little bit sophisticated in terms of my overthinking, the case. But it does explain at least one incredibly unique feature about this symphony, which is that because it's impossible to portray the afternoon in any concrete way in a piece of music, morning you can do, because you can do things that happen in the mornings, birds tweeting, the sun rising, things that have some kind of musical analog. But the afternoon, not so much. And so in this particular case, the outer movements have no themes. I'm not kidding. It's a symphony about nothing, but a wonderful symphony about nothing. Actually, it is really about something, but not in the outer movements. So, how does this symphony get going? The first movement does not use the flutes. The flutes are out in the first movement. And the remarkable thing about it, I think, really just amazes me, is that the opening march lays out the motto rhythm There's not a shared theme anywhere in this symphony, but there are shapes and gestures and objects that Haydn does reuse. And so the symphony has a motto rhythm, and the first, third, and fourth movements will all open with it. And I'm going to play you the opening of the march. There's a march-like introduction to the first movement, and then the opening of the minuet. And you'll see exactly what I mean, because they all start with the same rhythm. That rhythm is dum, bum, ba, bum. That's it. Like in Chopin's Funeral March, do, 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 do. Remember that? It's that rhythm. Dum, dum, da, dum. So I stuck a little pause between the two, and I'm going to play the opening march and then the minuet immediately. The minuet is much quicker than the opening march, which is very slow. So it's yum, bum, ba, bum for the opening, and the minuet is dum, bum, ba, dum, ba, but it's the same rhythm, and it's quite obvious. Listen to this, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Plain as day, right? Plain as the afternoon, the part of day we're talking about. But the really fun business is that when Haydn gets the movement going, I find this movement absolutely fascinating because, like I said, it has no themes. It has a lot of movement and motion and stuff in it, but there are no themes. You will not be able to hum a bar of this thing. I mean, you won't come away with any of it. But it's still marvelous because what Haydn is doing, what he's developing, the idea of the symphony in this particular case is texture. It's combinations of instruments in every conceivable texture. You've got unisons, you have, counterpoint, you have all the little solos, because the solo instruments in this particular symphony are quite specific. It's, generally speaking, 2 violins and a cello as a solo group, along with everybody else. All the woodwinds get solos. The double bass gets a solo. I mean, everyone else gets solos, but the main string solos are 2 violins and a cello. So you remember we talked about sonata form, and I said, well, it usually has an A subject and a B subject. You have first subject and a second subject. And these are usually themes, and the themes define the key areas, the keys in which the music operates. Here, it's totally different. The contrast is simply between full orchestra and solo combinations. Those are your subjects. None of them have real tunes. They have little motives, and they toss them back and forth. It's like a ping pong game. It's just boom, bong, boom, bong. You'll see exactly what I mean. It's really, really cool. So let's listen to the exposition, just the first part of the first movement, the allegro, the main body of the first movement. And then, I'll turn you loose and you can just listen to the rest of it yourself, because the development is just wonderful. Ooh, what Haydn does with all this stuff once he gets it all going. But he's just dealing with tiny little shuttlecock birdies that are getting batted back and forth between all the instruments. It's just amazing. Here it is. So, see what I mean? You get it, right? That's the movement. The movement is a study in sonority and in texture and in combining instruments every conceivable way. In fact, the whole symphony is that, but especially in these outer movements. So the first movement done with, Haydn now proceeds to the slow movement. This is an amazing movement. I mean, incredible. In fact, it's so incredible that I'm going to play you the whole movement. And, how many composers, seriously, how many composers do you think about where you really want to hear the slow movement, all of the slow movement, over and over again? And this is a long movement. This is over 8 minutes, which is more than twice as long as any other slow movement by Haydn that we've played before. It's an extraordinary movement because what Haydn has written is an operatic scena, a scene, a complete operatic scene. It's an opera. It's opera music. It consists of a recitative, an accompanied recitative for the solo violin, a duet for the violin and the cello, accompanied by 2 flutes who make their first appearance in the symphony in this movement, and then a cadenza for the 2 soloists and a conclusion. I've fully written out cadenza for both of them together. It's incredible. And you have to hear the whole thing. I'm going to indicate, where each section begins. But then you just have to listen. And I'm sorry it's over 8 minutes long and you're going to sit there at your computer like this, for 8 minutes. Just do it. I'm telling you, it's worth every single second. But first, let's talk about the components, the various components of the movement. First, we have the recitative. Now, recitative is simply sung speech. It moves at the pace of speech. It's declamation, and either it's accompanied. There's 2 kinds of two kinds of recitative: secco, or dry, which is just with like a harpsichord or keyboard instrument, or a cello on the bottom or something, just going ring, and then they're going. And then I had to go to the bathroom, and after that I made my lunch. That's a secco recitative. But if you really want to get dramatic, you accompany the recitative by the full orchestra. And that is the most dramatic thing in classical opera, accompanied recitative. Why? Because it's moving at the pace of speech. It's not going to have to be sort of a poetic, lots of repetition and melodic stuff, because the operas represent the emotion, the feeling that is generated by the recitative. So you have action, which generates feeling, and then the feeling itself, the action freezes, stops, while the emotion that feeling, that the action created is expressed. And that's what's happening in this movement. So you first have a very dark, troubled, dramatic, tense recitation for the solo violin, accompanied by the full orchestra with a pair of oboes. And it's just, I have to play it for you. It's amazing. It's very moody and turbulent. And I can even tell you what the plot is. If you know Mozart's operas or Rossini's operas, or you get a sense of what happens in these things, it's a violin, so it's a soprano. It's the soprano. The cello is the baritone or the tenor. That's the guy. So you've got the soprano, and she's alone, and she's upset, and she's worried, and she doesn't know what's going to happen to her. And then at the end of her recitative, her lover shows up, and all is well. He appears after all. She's not abandoned. Her life is not going to be miserable. And they sing a love duet. And that's what it is, a love duet, accompanied by the most gorgeous roulades and the 2 flutes who join in the love fest. And then at the end of that, there's going to be a cadenza. Now, a cadenza is simply a place where the music stops and the soloist, the singer in this case, improvises something very flashy and virtuosic on the melodies, presumably, of the aria that they've just sung. Now, in this case, of course, we have instruments. We don't have soloists, and there are 2 of them, and they are improvising together, which you really can't have in real life because that would be a disaster. So Haydn writes out everything that they do. There's no improvisation. It's supposed to sound like an improvisation, which it does. And then there's a short coda that wraps up the whole movement. So let's listen to the entire 8 and a bit minute slow movement of Haydn Symphony Number 7. It is just beyond incredible. Take a deep breath. Here it is. Never heard anything like it, have you? Was nothing like it in all of music before Haydn wrote this. And, instrumental recitative, such as we heard in this movement, became a big deal. I mean, they're fabulous. The most famous example is the beginning of the finale of Beethoven's Ninth, where the double basses and cellos are all doing the, oh, friends, let's not listen to this. Let's try out the first movement. Nah, to hell with that. Let's try out the second movement. That became a topos, a topic, an element of all future music, this kind of instrumental recitative. Haydn didn't invent it. It was done, for example, by C.P.E. Bach in some of his early sonatas. It's a wonderful device when used by a genius, as Haydn was. But this particular example is so graphic. It's so clear that something's going on. So maybe during Le Midi, maybe in the afternoon, they all went to the opera and took in a show. Maybe that's what's happening. But there's a much more important reason why this movement is as long and detailed and elaborate and expressive as it is. And that reason is because the first movement and the finale express nothing. As I said, they don't have melodies. They have textures. They're somewhat abstract. And so even here, in his scheme of contrasts, Haydn is juxtaposing something which is more, almost, well, like I said, almost sculptural. It's a kaleidoscope. It's an abstract design. It's pattern making, very entertaining, joyous, happy pattern making, but still pattern making. And then he gets to the heart of things with really intense human emotion, passion. That's why you have this incredibly elaborated and detailed slow movement, because he wants to have enough of that to represent the absolute beating heart of the symphony. It's really incredible. Now, the minuet I played you a little bit of already. You heard the opening of it, and we don't need to deal with it anymore other than to say that the middle section, the trio section as it's called, has another one of those weird and somewhat I don't know what the word is, somewhat the truculent solos for double bass. This one is not like spooky as the one in the previous symphony. That was a really, really odd bit of grotesquerie with bassoon and double bass. This is much smoother. The double bass is trying to sing, but it's just a little bit glum because double basses are. And then we can move from there straight on to the finale. Now, the finale returns to the concept of the first movement, but the finale has its own business to mind too. Why? Because it is the only movement in the entire symphony where all of the participating instruments are involved. Because remember, in the first movement, there were no flutes. In the second movement, you had 2 flutes. In the minuet, the flutes are gone again. They're gone, out, history. You have 2 oboes. But in the finale, you have 1 flute, 2 oboes, the bassoon, 2 horns, everybody's together for the only time in the symphony, telling us, once again, as if any more evidence were necessary, that this finale belongs in this symphony and in no other. All 4 movements are unified, creating a whole, an entire piece. And of course, Haydn, who took great pains to unify his symphonies, only uses a single flute in the finale because one of the oboists in the second movement had to double on flute, probably because his orchestra only had 1 flute player and he wanted a pair of them for his finale. And in those days, woodwind players particularly were not specialists the way they are today. They played everything. I mean, brass players did too. Horn players played trumpets, and people were jack of all trade type guys because that increased their chances of employment. It increased their utility in the very small orchestras of the day. So when Haydn uses 1 flute, it doesn't mean the other guy was like, sitting here like this, snoozing through the finale. He was probably the oboe player. The second oboe player probably played flute or something like that. Anyway, if you listen to the beginning of the finale, you will hear our characteristic motto rhythm. Remember, that was bum, bum, ba-dum, right? Well, the finale is dum, bum, ba-bum, like that. That's the form of it in the finale. So we've heard 3 sort of different versions of the same rhythm based on the length of the notes in each one. There was yum, bum, ba-bum in the beginning, and then the minuet was dum, dum, da-dum, it did whatever the minuet did. You gotta get it right. And the finale is da, 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 da. And here, it's just like the first movement. You have this incredibly kaleidoscopic play of timbres. The only thing resembling a tune really is that opening rhythm. I mean, there's nothing else. The rest of it is all just back to your ping pong game, the back and forth, except that everybody gets even more to do because there's more people participating. So you have quite a bit of stuff for the solo flute, the single solo flute, who didn't get a lot of solos before this finale. So he needs to get his workout. It was a he, by the way. It was not a she in those days. So he needs his workout, and everybody else participates. So I'm going to play you the exposition of the finale, and you will see exactly what I mean. Here we go. There it is, an amazing symphony, another amazing symphony in this series of 3. And I have to tell you, I'm just going to speak personally for a second because, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was telling me that he was really enjoying these videos and he was getting a lot out of them. And he said, of course, I know these symphonies, I've heard them. I said, yeah, but here's the thing. Nobody really pays attention to them. But when you do, it's marvelous. It's just marvelous. And that's happening to me as much as it's happening to you. I don't sit down and think about the things that I'm going to say for weeks in advance and make sketches and notes and things before I do one of these talks. I play the symphony, then I sit myself down and I talk to you. That's how it works. The only extra time I take is in coming up with the music examples I want to include. But I'm in the same position you're in. This is as much a journey of discovery for me as it is for you. So I thank you sincerely for joining me. Tell your friends. This is a crusade. Let's bring them in. It's a good crusade, not like the yucky kind, like in the Middle Ages, where you plucked the hair off of Peter the Hermit's mule and, died of horrible illnesses stuck in a swamp somewhere on your way to the Middle East, or you got rid of all the extra and useless, children of noble families by sending them off on the crusade. No. This is a worthwhile, wonderful, delightful crusade. And so I hope you will all continue to join me. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much. Take care.